This is more of chapter 3. Even the shadows cast by the surviving trees opposite the front door, and still caged in wrought iron, seemed undimmed by the dirt and filth of the over-industrialized city. The trees budded in spring with the very palest of green. The children of the ghetto, for no reason they could or would explain, respected the caged trees, and the house, and the people who lived within it. They were, the people who lived in this strange house, in their fashion, the neighborhood's private mystery and special treasure. The people who lived within the mystery were white gentry, whose bloodlines went so far back in the history of the pre-Civil War South that they seemed wrapped in magnolia and legend. The husband, Enoch Pratt, was frequently consulted by various historical societies, for he was the possessor of a most unique library of long out-of-print books concerning Baltimore's history. He had made of himself the curator of the past. A curiosity lay in the fact that he was unaware of it. He saw himself, did Enoch Pratt, as very much a keeper of the present. It was not his fault that his present was everyone else's past. Enoch dressed in slender trousers with elastic straps that looped beneath the insteps of his short boots, a style 50 years out of date. His shirts were made by an old firm that kept the pattern in use in order to fill the occasional requests of theatrical costumers and historical drama societies. The sleeves were puffed at the wrists, the front heavy with pleating, and the collars high. His wife, Mary, also dressed in the fashion of the 1800s, her hair always in the intricate curled fashion of days gone by. Their dealings with the outside world were conducted almost exclusively through tradesmen who delivered. They subscribed to no newspapers or magazines, had no radio, and generally lived as if what was not so. It was a rare and exceedingly fine madness. Of course, in avoiding the world so completely, it changed all around them, and they were unaware of it. What they believed to be so became so, as far as they were concerned. Their principal outing of the year occurred upon the 7th of October. Upon that day they traveled, largely afoot, since their attempts to hire a horse-drawn carriage presented great difficulty, to Westminster churchyard. There they placed a rose-encrusted wreath upon the grave of Edgar Allan Poe. They almost never spoke to the people they passed on the street. Upon occasion they would nod to the verger of Westminster Church, and he would nod in return, and wish a good day to Mr. and Mrs. Enoch Pratt. Enoch would regale his wife on their return journey, back to their home and to the century that was more to their liking, with the oft-told tale of how it had been his own great-great-great-grandfather who had long ago published many of Edgar Allan Poe's works. It was from that same publishing house, printers of textbooks and inspirational works, that the Pratts derived their income, that stipend that allowed them to deny nearly all that had happened in the world since the death of Poe. They were both quite mad, but not dangerously so. In the year 1940, a natural thing happened that they could not deny. Mary Pratt became pregnant. She took to her bed and eventually delivered a baby girl in the same bed it had been conceived in. The family doctor, an old man who loved them in their gentle madness, took Enoch aside and explained a bit more of the facts of heredity than Enoch, till then, had been aware of. Their child had been born afflicted with albinism. And this albinism, pray tell, what is its cause? Enoch Pratt asked. It may be from a total absence of pigmentation cells, interference with their migration to their intended locations during development of the embryo, or the lack of the necessary hormonal stimulation. Ah, said Enos, no more enlightened than before. And what is the reason for its appearance? The doctor hesitated, on the edge of knowledge he was reluctant to reveal. Consanguinity can figure into it prominently. Enoch smiled rather coldly. I see. At least I think I do. Then you are saying it is a punishment for marrying first cousin to first cousin? Not a punishment, but a consequence, perhaps, the doctor said, unruffled in the face of Enoch's own illusion. The doctor had known them both since they were children. The truth was, Mary was Enoch's own sister, not his first cousin. Perhaps it was incest, and their pretense that what had happened did not happen, that had driven the Pratts into full retreat into another century. In any case, it was not the doctor's concern. It was the child who had to be dealt with. What special care must be given to the child? She lacks the pigmentation that normally screens against light rays. The sun will be a great danger to her, cautioned the doctor. A small smile that might be described as complacent or even self-satisfied quirked the corner of Enoch's mouth. Even her eyes lack protection. They will be painfully sensitive to light. Enoch's smile broadened. Well then, what a perfect place for her to have born. We rarely leave the house, and the shades are nearly always drawn, he said, with rather perfect logic. The doctor sighed, placed his hands on his knees, and stood up. Perhaps Enoch was right. What better place for a moon-child to be born than into a fairy tale? When the little one first opened her eyes in the soft glow of candlelight, they were not much dazzled. They did, however, sparkle with those red reflections that mark the gaze of the albino. The irises were the palest of gray and somewhat wispy, like the rings that often surround the autumn moon. Oh, what a love, what a delight, Enoch cooed, as his wife smiled softly in the near dark with equal delight. And, in their own little world, it all seemed right and proper. In time, the fairy tale acquired dark moments of its own. It was discovered that Serena, for that was the name they chose for her, had incapacities much greater than a simple loss of pigmentation. The doctor came to examine her and diagnosed that she suffered as well from a congenital atrophy of the lower limbs. Serena's natural functions would not be impaired. Through therapy she would walk after a fashion, but gone would be the running, jumping, leaping joys of normal childhood. The doctor's heart ached when he had to offer news of this new disaster to Enoch, but Enoch only smiled again. It is a pity, of course, but then, what better household could a child who will suffer difficulty in getting about be born into? We have no need of the world outside of this house. The doctor nodded as he put his instruments back into his battered black bag. As he prepared to take his leave of them, he pondered the fact that God, apparently, had prepared the child for the best life it could hope for in this strange home. Serena was given a room of her own when she was 6. It was adorned with murals illuminating the stories of the Grimms and Hans Christian Andersen. The colors were so pale as to be the merest breath of color. Still, as a backdrop to the luminous child, they were crashingly vivid. The room was filled with the plush toys of a bygone era. White rabbits, white elephants, white mice, and white ducks with pale yellow bills. There were shelves filled with old-fashioned picture books of another age. Enoch commissioned a young artist and a young writer to create a small book telling the tale of Serena, Moonchild, in a gentle, loving, and fantastic way. One copy only was printed, which made it by far the most expensive of all children's books. Further adventures appeared every year until she was 12. It was in that year that she began to go blind. For the first and only time, Enoch cried over the trials of his little fairy princess and wondered about the wisdom of his marriage. Mary took the news with greater courage. Serena took it with the greatest courage of all. She asked that a chair, with pillows piled high, to be placed in front of the window, so that she could see and store up visions of the world. The black children of the neighborhood wondered about the magic child, and were always silent when they passed by her window. They would wave and smile at her, and she would wave and smile in return. Sometimes they brought small gifts, deposited furtively on the doorstep. A ball, a rag doll, a small bag of marbles. They were, in a way, offerings to a goddess. Sometimes the children stood on the sidewalk and whispered their whispers to her, even though from that distance it would have been impossible for her to hear them. Somehow they believed she would mysteriously know, and in some magical way make their wishes come true. It took a full year before her sight was completely gone. Serena feared the velvet dark at first, and regretted desperately that she could no longer read. She did for a time become hypersensitive to the touch of anything upon her. The doctor feared a new affliction. It passed away in time, though a great sensitivity of touch stayed in her hands. Not long after she went totally blind, Serena discovered, quite by chance, that she could read the slight impressions left by type upon the page in the normal way of printing. Knowing the shapes of letters, she was able to read the large typefaces, and then smaller ones, until her hands would fly across the pages like tiny white hummingbirds. Her hands moved so quickly, interpreting the slightly engraved surface, that she saw nearly as well as someone with the gift of sight. There was a second gift that awaited her, that did not awaken until it was needed, a more awesome, almost terrible gift. Serena's blindness was a blow that shattered Enoch Pratt's entire fabric of fantasy. His marriage, his whole fantastic retreat from the world, came crashing down around his ears. The world around him suddenly became evil, cold, and unforgiving. His marriage had taken on the evil aspects of the doomed in the tales of his beloved Edgar Allan Poe. Enoch saw himself somehow trapped in a tale more macabre than any his idol Poe could ever have created. In his despair, he took to drink, and passed eventually into a madness deeper and more terrifying than any Poe had ever dreamed of. Awake or asleep, he lived in a phantasm, a living hell eating at the edges of his being. He became aware, suddenly it seemed, that his white family, his milk-white girl, were living in a sea of black faces. One night, drunk, he left the house and walked through the neighborhood, hair disheveled and eyes wild. He stumbled down the mean streets, his mind aflame with tormented images, made all the more hideous in the garish, neon-lit streets of this century he had too long denied. Serena's second gift awoke in her. It was in the shape of a dream. She lay on a coverlet of light silk and dreamed. Her father's madness, his pain, filled the dream. Enoch moved among the blacks, screaming, "Get back to the plantation." Hostile eyes impaled him, conversations halted, and a silent storm of faces turned to consider this strange apparition from the past walking before them. The madness was upon him full tilt. The old hates and prejudices of another century swam in his brain like blind cavefish. Enoch waved his arms at them, screaming, "Don't you darkies know your masters will take good care of you? Don't do this foolish thing. Where will you go? What will you do?" A black child tried to take his hand and lead him back home. She did not understand this strangely dressed white man's rage or his madness. She only knew he belonged, somehow, to the magic child in the house, and she thought he might be lost. Enoch, with misguided zeal, stooped down and tried to embrace the little girl. "Ginny May, you come here, Ginny May," the little girl's older sister yelled from the stoop of an old house. "You stay away from that crazy white man." "He's okay, it's only Mr. Pratt," said Ginny May. The sister came down off the stoop and swept the little girl aside, putting herself between the white man and the child. Enoch cried out and stumbled toward the black girl, his arms outstretched to take her to his breast. "Lord," he cried, "don't talk like that to your master, Mandy. I'll save you." The girl slapped out at him as his hands touched her. She shoved him back, more embarrassed than frightened. "Get away from me, crazy-ass honky," she screamed at him, figuring if the shove didn't keep him away, the shot would. A well-dressed black man, sitting in his flashy Cadillac, a stranger to this neighborhood, slammed his car door open and strode out into the street. Say, who that bastard think he is anyway? Hey, what you doing, you white bastard? Raping this sweet girl now?" said the well-dressed black dude. Enoch whirled around to face the deep voice, the threat at his back. "I will save her from the mistake of freedom," he cried. "She'll go home or know the taste of the overseer's whip." The dude punched him in the mouth, busting out Enoch's front teeth, smashing him to the pavement. He hadn't meant to hit him so hard. It was that edge of madness in Enoch's voice that had thrown him, scared him even, made him swing so hard it would have frightened him. Serena jerked in her sleep. Enoch's madness whirled through her own mind, the pain and rage and terrible loss. Mixed in with these things was something deeper, a drive more demanding, guilt, shame. Enoch had sinned in a way only death could cleanse. I must die. I must be punished. I want to die. Yes, those were the innermost thoughts tumbling in his mad brain. These thoughts were as clear in Serena's dream as if they were printed on a page for her fingers to read. "Good Christ, stop that, mister," the girl yelled at the top of her voice, angry because things were getting out of hand. "You had no call to hit him like that." Her little sister hid her face in her skirt, hiding the sight of bloodied Enoch on the ground. "Man trying to rape you or something," said the black man defensively. The older girl said with some heat, "You get along now. He ain't trying to rape nobody." Rape? The word seemed to act as a magnet. The word went flying around the crowd on the street, triggering hard feelings. The blacks gathered, sensitive to the word and the meaning. There was blood all over Enoch's face and his ruffled shirt. His ruined mouth opened and closed spasmodically. The girl stepped between the fallen man and the man from the Cadillac who had knocked him down. She roughly shouldered the man aside. "You quit now. I know this man. He done suffered enough. Didn't have no harm in him. He's just a little weird in the head is all. He been hurt enough. You leave him be." The black man still had his fist clenched. The faces in the crowd all around were still hostile. The older sister bent down and helped Enoch to his feet. He seemed dazed, the shock of the blow rendering him senseless. He staggered, almost fell. His eyes saw, not this world, but into another, Poe's dead world, and it was his own grave his wild eyes sought. The black girl's hand on his arm steadied him. This act of helping him to his feet eased the tension in the watching crowd. The anger began to recede like a storm with spent force. But this was not as Enoch wished it. Serena in her dreams saw it all. Her father, that poor, mad, frightened creature, with pains and hates too large for this world. This man, so unlike her father, with a horrifying need that only death could cure, stood before her as if begging for mercy, for that release from this life he so desperately wanted. Serena then understood it was more than a dream. The dream grew, pulsing with energy and sudden force, until it became a torrent in her head, a giddy rush to power, awesome, limitless power. She saw the grave Enoch so desperately sought, the violent punishment his mind and body shrieked to have. And to that end, she moved what did not have the strength to move. Serena nearly screamed in her sleep, a smile of secret knowledge on her delicate lips. She went back inside her brain, deep into the hidden places, until in that secret, terrible place, she at last understood what she must do. There had to be an end to Enoch's shame, to a lifetime of hurt and anguish that would not stop. It was like sticking a knife into a living creature, but she did it. She reached into a wish in Enoch's mind and made death love him. Enoch's eyes glazed, his unsteady legs stiffened with a surge of adrenaline. His face was suffused with his own madness. His hands clenched and unclenched, now fists, now like the claws of some great, predatory bird. The people in the hostile crowd were now beginning to move off, their anger vented, the crisis over. His eyes focused, and he looked all about him, a quick, all-inclusive glance, and saw for the first time a world he had pretended against all his life. He saw the ugliness of the city ghetto, the squalid, sordid hustle of the age in which he really lived. With this sudden clarity of mind came unbidden an act unthinkable, unspeakable, against everything Enoch had ever known or thought. His hands went up, reaching for the girl. It happened very quickly. His fingers found the neck of her thin cotton dress, and, adrenaline strong, he ripped it down to her waist, exposing her white bra. The crowd fell on him like lions. Had they not seen some crazy white man laying hands on one of their sisters? They stamped him into the pavement. Yes, yes, Enoch's mind cried, my just punishment. The weight of the angry crowd, hard shoes and fists, raining down on him, turned him from a human being into a bloodied pulp. They killed him, there in the street, pounding him into an almost unrecognizable lump of human meat, just 2 blocks away from the house with the lace curtains and the gentle moonchild dreaming his death in the window. It was, in Serena's heart, in Enoch's mind, an act of kindness.